Okay, first let me do a sound check here. Can you all hear me okay?
Can hear you fine, Brett. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. First, let me say apologies for not being in there in person. Had some family commitments I could not move this week, but we'll go through the topics that were flagged here. So if you want to go to the next slide and one more. We'll review some of the questions that the VCOEB posed in the ask here, and we've broken the response down into sort of three topics, all related to the questions. First topic will be appropriations and how that relates to EUL activities. The second piece is the appropriations that we received under the PACT Act. What are those? What can they be used for, and how that relates to West LA? And then the third topic is how we utilize those capital contribution funds, which is one type of funding that we received under the PACT Act. So if you go to the next slide, the request that came from the VCOEB, I won't read these to you, but essentially they related to have we looked for and sought monies for EUL across the country, but certainly including West LA over the past decade. And then secondly, what about the monies allocated for West LA specifically? What can we do with those? What type of money is that? And then third, getting into a schedule and drawdown of the EUL funds and how we used that. So if we go to the first topic, I'll start digging in here. The federal budget process does not have a specific line item for enhanced use lease projects. What it does have is the ability under statute to do capital contributions to enhanced use lease projects. Capital contributions are defined in Title 38, and we can make those contributions using minor construction appropriation. So that's the color of money that we're allowed to use for EUL capital contributions. When we get into the budget, though, minor construction funds are not appropriated on a project by project basis. Other accounts, that is the case. We actually get money for a specific project. For minor construction, that is not how they actually give us the money. The money comes in a lump sum. It comes as part of the minor construction appropriation, and then it is divvied up between the administrations. So not just VHA, but the other administrations also have minor construction projects. And then within each of those administrations, it's then divvied up into individual projects. So the good news is there's flexibility there. When we get a lump sum of minor construction project funding, we then have to look at what projects are executable, what we need money for that given year. And those funds are good for 5 years. So there is flexibility there. And generally what happens is the enhanced use lease projects that may need capital contributions, we go in and look for the available funding in the year that we are ready to execute that capital contribution for that project. So they're not requested on a per project basis, but there is available funding in minor construction. Separate and distinct from the minor construction, which is the only way we can contribute directly, there's certainly other activities that relate to enhanced use leases. And that could be preparation for the sites, it could be cleanup, environmental work, things like that. VA has the ability to do that ourselves, and we can do that through a number of different accounts. Predominantly in VHA, that is the non-recurring maintenance account. We use that to do the work on our end. Very similar to the capital contributions in minor, NRM is not allocated on a project by project basis. It is appropriated as part of the medical facilities. So there is flexibility in doing NRM projects if there's money available for any particular year. So I've just described the typical process. The PACT Act was different. The PACT Act was something that we had not experienced before, and that was an appropriation specifically for entering into enhanced use leases. And that quote is important because that quote, entering into enhanced use leases, is actually in the PACT Act language that provided the $922 million. That is something that was not a particular color of money, and I'll explain what that means when we get on to the next slide, but it was something that Congress provided to VA. It was not something we requested. So we didn't make an ask of Congress for $922 million. We asked them for an expansion of the EUL authority, When they did that in the PACT Act, CBO scored the cost of that at $922 million. Therefore, Congress decided to give us that money since it had to be paid for in some way, shape, or form for the bill to be passed. So that's how it came into existence. That's top line for the appropriations that relate to enhanced use leases. If we go to the next slide, I'll start digging into PACT Act a little bit more specifically. The 922 million did not have a color of money, meaning that they couldn't give it to us until VA came up with a way to spend that money to enter into enhanced use leases. And we did that by breaking it into 4 separate appropriations and specific dollar amounts for each of these appropriations. The first appropriation that got some of the money is our Gen Ad, General Administrative. Essentially, that's people, contracts, travel, things like that to support entering into enhanced use leases. That's not a big chunk of the money, but it is something that's necessary for us to sort of expand the use of EUL, as we have to have people to do that. The second one is minor construction. That's where the capital contributions come into play. And we put a larger chunk of money into the minor construction appropriation to support both West LA and a number of other enhanced use lease sites across the country that may need capital contributions to make them financially viable. The third category is major construction. This is a little bit of an oddball. We're not actually doing construction under this account, but a part of that account allows us to do contract support to support the EUL program. So there's a small amount of money that went into major construction just to provide additional contractor support in the EUL program. And then the last bucket of money was the medical facilities account. And medical facilities is specific to VHA. And within there, there's 2 types of things we can use that money for. The first one are those NRM projects, so the infrastructure improvements, environmental remediation, things like that we need to do in order to be able to enter into the enhanced use lease. Those NRM projects can use some of that money. And then there's the support in terms of people and contracts to help make the properties available and ready to go. So that comes in as another part of the medical facilities appropriation. Okay. Each of those are no year money, meaning that $922 million does not expire. It doesn't have an end date associated with it, but our spend plan looked at about a 15-year term to get rid of and use all of that $922 million. As we go through this, it is quite possible that at some point Congress looks at that 922 and says, you've only spent 300 million of it. We're going to rescind and pull back the rest of that money. That's certainly within Congress's ability to do. And they do have visibility into our spend of this. We do report to them regularly on our obligations and expenditures for each of these 4 appropriations as it relates to the original 15-year spend plan we produced. So this is the top level. If we go to the next slide, within each of these pieces, we have allocated specific amounts to West LA. Some of this is non-flexible, meaning I can't move money from the Gen Ad appropriation to the minor construction appropriation. That is definitive. That cannot be changed at this point in time. But within any of those given appropriations, we do have flexibility. So even if we've allocated a certain amount of money to West LA and a portion of it to other projects, we do have the ability to move it between West LA or other projects if we need to do that. We also have the ability to change the projects themselves. So what we would spend the money on within each of those capital contribution or interim type account. So there is some flexibility in there. If we look at the bottom, the table has a breakdown for West LA. We're estimating about $115 million in the minor construction for capital contributions. That's about 12.5% of the total amount of money that we got. We've obligated a little less than 10 million of that. So we've still got over $100 million left to be able to obligate for capital contributions for West LA specifically. Similar on non-recurring maintenance and service component, we had estimated about $263 million. That's a little bit shy of 30% of the total amount. We've used a good portion of that. We've obligated 52 million of that. So we still have about 211 million. So all told, we're looking at about 380 roughly $1 million that we've allocated specifically to West LA, of which we've spent about 61, $62 million to date. So there's a good amount of money left for us to continue to go through. Now, a lot of that money is spoken for. So there's projects that the West LA team is doing to get parcels ready, to get infrastructure upgraded. So there's already plans for a lot of that money. Similar on the capital contributions, we've got projects and parcels coming up that we anticipate doing contributions on. But we believe we're in good shape in terms of having the funding necessary to carry us at least through the 1,200 units that we have plans for right now. Okay. And moving into topic 3, and this is going to focus a little bit more specifically on capital contributions. So for the other buckets that we talked about, the NRM and the Gen Ad, those are VA direct spend. So we're the ones actually doing the work. We're the ones spending that money. But for capital contributions, that minor construction money is included as part of the enhanced use lease. So when we do that, we can use the PACT Act funding, which is our primary source. We can also use traditional minor construction funds if they're available. And that's not always the case, but if they are available, we can use regular minor funds as well. The capital contributions are approved at my level as part of the enhanced use lease. And when we approve that, it's documented in a commitment agreement. So the commitment agreement is the actual document. It is an appendix to the enhanced use lease that outlines the amount of money and the use of that money for that particular project or that particular sublease that we're doing. And it looks like you might expect a basic table that would say, for this type of work, we're giving you a capital contribution of this amount of money, and here's what we're expecting you to do with that. That gets executed. Once that is executed, the work in and of itself can commence. That money is not given to the developer. It is paid in arrears. So the commitment agreement sets the expectations. As work is completed, they would then submit draw requests against that original commitment agreement. And as part of that, they're providing documentation that the work is complete, that the bills are being paid, any kinds of liens are being taken care of, and then VA pays those as a reimbursement in arrears for that capital contribution amount. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. That's my last slide. Quite possibly questions out there, so happy to address anything.
Good morning, Brad, and thank you. That was very informative. It's Rob Beglin, the chair. Reminded of that admonition of following the money. It always leads to issues. So, Brad, I want to start by just kind of seeing if I could simplify for me more than anyone, and maybe the board will already know the big pots of money we're talking about. So you gave us a breakdown that 115 million has been identified for the minor construction capital contributions account, and then 263 million has been identified for non-recurring maintenance and planning expenses. So when we think about the redevelopment of the North Campus, meaning the area north of Wilshire, is that redevelopment effort only budgeted through the minor construction account, or does it have funds in the non-recurring maintenance planning account?
So it'll have both. The simplest example in the non-recurring maintenance side would be the water distribution system. So that infrastructure is needed to support the redevelopment of the North Campus, but it is included in the non-recurring maintenance line item because VA is the one that is executing that, since it's a more campus-wide impact.
Any other major expenses on the North Campus that are in the non-recurring maintenance account?
So all of the infrastructure, I know stormwater is not cheap. I think sewer has a pretty high. So most of the core infrastructure systems are all part of that non-recurring maintenance line item.
Okay, and then to shift to the minor construction account, is that mainly the parcel turnover cost then?
Not necessarily. It could be. It could be part of that. And we've done, prior to the PACT Act, we have done some capital contributions that aren't captured in here for things like some of the environmental remediation that's necessary. So it can be part of that partial turnover. It can also be part of the expense and the financing stack that the developer is putting together to actually do the rehab and development. So it could cover part of the cost of that actual rehab and development of these buildings.
Okay, so if I were to ask you to step back and estimate, how much would you estimate the agency is committing in terms of financial resources to the redevelopment of the North Campus for housing purposes?
I mean, I think all of this could be considered for housing purposes. It may not be limited to just housing, but it would be for North Campus redevelopment to support housing.
I'm not sure I follow the line. When you say all of it, you mean all of the 115 million?
Yes, and the 263. So I think that the total 378 here is available. We've obviously not spent all of it, but all of the things in these two buckets are related to housing and support of housing on the North Campus.
Okay. Um, and then I guess the related question is, you explained that under the EUL framework, the agency affords a commitment letter to the housing developer. And I'm curious, what is the state of that commitment letter as it relates to the housing developer selected here?
So it's done on a parcel by parcel basis. So there are pre-packed commitments that are done and complete. The trunk line that we did with Building 207 is an example of that. That was about $13 million to do the initial trunk line. That's done and complete. But we do potentially have commitment agreements with each of the parcels being developed. So 210 is the one that's on deck right now, going to financial closing here in the near term. That has its own commitment agreement. There could then be one for the next parcel and the next parcel.
Okay, so let me ask you the status of that. So you said 210 is on deck. Has there been a commitment letter exchanged with the principal developer for lot 408?
Not for 408. That one is not to the point where we're working it, but that gets finalized as we're getting toward the execution of the sublease for that parcel. So 210 is the one that is not executed, but is furthest along.
Okay. All right, those were all the questions I had. Does anyone else have any questions? All right, why don't we go, Mr. Sims, thank you for the presentation. We're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break.
Thank you.